Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new episode on the CollegeCrafts YouTube channel. Now, in the previous episode, we created the nightstand, and as you can see, it's still a little bare. We got the decorations still up, because as of recording the previous video's outro, this is the same day. So, I want to get a lamp, but I want to make it more intimate between me and my girlfriend. So, what I'm going to do is, in secret, I'm going to be building a lamp for the both of us, and I hope it turns out really cool. And I guess there's nothing else to do but get started. Here's the process. I started by grabbing 2 cut down pieces of pallets, my favorite wood, that were a little bit bigger than the stencil that I created through a Word document, which was basically a heart and my first initial along with my girlfriend's first initial. And I placed those in the middle, and then I traced around the heart with a pencil, and then after removing the stencil, created a darker line that I could see better for when I was cutting it out, which I cut out with the jigsaw, and then using a compass set to a 1-inch setting, I drew another line going around, which I would also cut out with the jigsaw. Next, you have to put your hand through its paces by getting a piece of sandpaper and sanding down all the dirt, grime, or paint that was left on the palette, rounding off the edges to the best of your ability, and making sure that everything fits tightly together. I then glued the 2 halves together, drilling out a hole in the base for the RGBs to fit through. I chose RGB so that I could change the color, and then as you saw me do a little bit earlier, I drew a line down the dead center of the heart on the inside so that I could follow that with my Dremel. I'm carving out a channel for the RGBs to fit through so that they wouldn't be on the outside of the heart, and I put it on a slanted surface so that the RGBs wouldn't be facing straight out as well. And now, as you can see, I'm painting the inside of the channel white, which will diffuse the light that is emitted from the RGBs, creating more glow coming from the inside of the channel. I put on as many coats as needed to make sure that there was no wood and it was just a nice solid glossy white all the way through the channel, being careful not to get it on any of the wood. Now, the RGB strip is still going to be harsh from each pixel on the strand pointed out, and we will be addressing that a little bit later, but first I wanted to get on to carving out the 2 letters that you saw in the original stencil. I took a thin palette and had a cutout piece of the stencil with the R and J on there, and I sanded off the top of the palette that the stencil would be sitting on that I would carve it out of, and I taped the stencil to the palette to secure it. Then, using a carving tool on my Dremel, I started to trace the outline of the stencil, then removed the tape and the stencil paper, and continued to carve even further and deeper into the wood until the letters came out. This is how the letters will fit into the lamp once everything's said and done, but first, the paint has dried, so I'm going to attach the RGB strips to the channels using the adhesive backing along with some super glue to make sure that it stays in place. Then it was on to the second part of the diffuser along with the white lights, the one that would kind of get rid of the harshness of the RGB strips. I took some blank stencil paper and doubled it up and cut it to the width of the lamp and then super glued it into place. The next step I took was to stain the R and J the same lighter stain as the headboard and the nightstand. Then I moved all the pieces on top of an acrylic sheet and hot glued the heart to it on the outside edge, and also put some hot glue in the hole where the RGBs fit through. And as you just saw, I finally did my first epoxy pour. I mixed some of the silver sparkles that we did on top of our bar in an earlier video and put that in there to add some shininess to when the project was done, and placed the R and J in there. Now, wood floats, so you have to wait until the epoxy gains a little bit more viscosity so that it stays down, but after a little bit of time it'll stay in place. While the epoxy was curing, it was time to work on the base that would hold the lamp up. To do that, I took a pallet and cleaned off one of the edges and then cut 5 inches in, and then I took another piece and cut 5 inches in, and then I squared off both sides by making it 5 inches in both dimensions, making a square. I sanded both sides of the square to make it a little bit more presentable. I then grabbed one of the squares that I was going to make the top and marked the center and measured out a hole that I would then cut out using a drill bit to make room for a jigsaw and sawing out the hole. And remember that this is the top piece, so the other square must be the bottom piece. That means there needs to be middle pieces, and that's exactly what I made next. I grabbed a pallet board with less width, and I cut it to 7 inches tall, which I had to do 3 additional times because I was going to be making it a box. I stripped the front and back facing panels of the box to 3 inches, and then the 2 side pieces to 2 inches, and with the thickness of the wood eventually met 3 inches in each dimension. Next up was to form the box itself. To do that, I had the front and back pieces standing up and fit the first side piece in the middle, gluing it together and clamping it together. And then I reached for the other middle piece and obviously put it in the top and clamped that together too, which I had to wait to dry before proceeding with sanding it, which I sanded until everything was perfectly square. And then I wanted a little bit more additional light coming out of the base piece. So what I did is I measured the center of the box that I had just made, and using a pencil drew a line down the center. With that, I grabbed a drill and drilled a bunch of holes down the line, grabbing a bigger bit, one that would fit the Dremel tool bit that I was about to use, and widening out the hole, and then obviously grabbing the Dremel and using a carving bit to shave off the inside to create a solid line for light to flow through. And then I grabbed a small piece of sandpaper and put it in the hole and started sanding it smooth and rounding off the edges. And remember, while building this, it doesn't have to be perfect because the handmade look shows a little bit more and adds a lot more character. Now that the epoxy is cured, it's time to get back to the lamp part. As you probably saw in the clip where I poured the epoxy, there was a little bit of leaking, so I had to sand it flat. And that was the back, and I decided to keep the back the same way instead of buffing it out, because that way the back could act as another diffuser. And after that, I stained the base part of the lamp with the top and bottom plates the same light stain as the letters and as the light stain on the headboard and nightstand. And the middle box, as well as the heart, I decided to stain the dark stain. And after, I drilled a hole for the cable for the RGB strips to come out of once everything was put together. And even though I didn't buff the back, I decided I did want to buff the front of the lamp, so I grabbed some sandpaper ranging from 400 to 2000 grit, going 400, 600, 800, 1000, 1500, and then 2000 grit sandpaper, sanding the entire surface, and then grabbing a polishing pad with some polish, and then grabbed my drill and polished the surface of the lamp. After that, I grabbed some more stencil paper, doubled it up, and super glued it behind the back of the slit of the box. And finally, it was time to put everything together. I started by grabbing the RGB strand, feeding it through the hole that I made in the top plate, and then started feeding it through the middle box. And then I put the end of the cord through the little hole that I had made for it at the bottom of the box. Then, using some glue, I rested the lamp on top of the top plate, and using some more glue, rested the top plate on top of the box, and then using even more glue, rested the box on top of the bottom plate. The lamp is so close to complete, but there's still one more thing that I wanted to do. I took a 3/4 inch wooden dowel and stained it to the same light stain as everything else that was using the light stain, cut it to the 7 inches, and then using some glue posted it into the corner of the base. I then did that 3 more times so that all 4 corners would have it. And just like that, it was done. Well guys, here it is. Obviously, this part can use another round of buffing, but honestly, this is taking me a lot longer than I wanted it to. But in my head, it does actually look really, really cool. Now, if I just plug it in, these cords, there it is. And if I just shut the light off, you can see it in its full glory. And like I said, this needs another round of buffing, but I love this little slit of light in there. And my girlfriend actually got a sneak preview at it. That's why I'm not showing her reaction, because it wouldn't be authentic, and people on YouTube can spot that out in an instant. But either way, she loved it, and I think it looks fantastic. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next episode.